Pathfinders are the ones who actually look out for or search for hyperspace routes.
I think so.
Welcome to Talk About Tatooine, where we show the world why twins are such weirdos.
Not digging that intro, but all right.
No, for real. Welcome to Talk About Tatooine. I'm Andrew.
I'm Nathan.
And we are twin brothers here to bring you what's new in nerddom and give colorful commentary on our favorite subjects. Welcome to our cantina, grab a drink, and settle in as we set course for realities beyond our own.
Well, welcome everyone to episode 68. Today's recording date is April 20th. Blaze it, and this episode will be released on Monday, April 22nd. So for our fans, I also noticed that we were one episode away from recording our 69th episode on April 20th.
Oh my gosh.
We were so close, folks.
We almost did the meme.
Anyways, today we're going to be discussing the High Republic, but first we're going to start off with a starter question. Also, make sure you stick around to the ends of the episode. We might have some nerddom news for you. All right, so our starter question today is, Andrew, I'm actually just going to rattle this off at you here today. What is your favorite beverage to drink while you are camping?
While I'm camping? Iced tea with whiskey or coffee. Iced tea with whiskey. Let's go. Depends on the temperature outside, but I really like drinking coffee all the time, anywhere, in any setting ever. But iced tea and whiskey is really good. Specifically, peach iced tea and whiskey.
Oh, so good. Peach iced tea and whiskey is fantastic. We basically call that camping tea.
Yeah.
Is literally you just get the biggest mason jar you can and you fill it up with a third peach whiskey or peach schnapps. You can do both. A third whiskey and a third tea, and it's literally just like, it's the booziest thing ever. That would have been my answer exactly. But if I had to say something different, honestly, just like a really simple, just rum and Coke.
Yep.
Just something like super simple. I could prep it beforehand, or I could just have two ingredients and I don't really have to worry about mixing it all that much. I usually don't drink stuff like old fashions unless I have that prepared beforehand and it's batch made, and all I have to do is pour it into a cup.
I would love to do a taste test of, like, I know we're not a food channel, but we want to launch a food channel at some point. Do a taste test of like what's actually better, like the canned rum and Cokes or the whiskey and Cokes, or like making it yourself, or like with cheap whiskey, expensive whiskey, nice Coke, Diet Coke, regular Coke, but not Pepsi. We're not going to include Pepsi.
Yeah. So that'll actually be the, like, kind of our cantina part of the channel when we eventually build it, because that's like kind of an easy gimme. But I actually tried that the other day, and I set up and filmed my own experiment using different types of bitters in a cocktail. The quality came out awful, but it was a really fun experiment and a really good learning opportunity to figure out how to do like actual film and audio and just get in that setting. But yes, I have been working on getting that done. I drank a lot of tequila that night. It was a good time. Guys, before we get into our episode, thank you all to our patrons and big supporters. So, as you guys know, we do a lot of streaming over on Twitch. We actually just finished streaming on Twitch for several hours on our Minecraft world, which, again, if you're a patron and you support the podcast, you get access to the realm. So huge thanks to our top patrons, Mike, Isaac, and David, and to one of our newest supporters, the Calm Brew, who is one of our biggest and absolutely probably most generous supporter over on Twitch.
For sure.
You guys are the reason we do this. And honestly, you guys are all a delight to have in the Discord server. Keep in mind here, guys, for just $5 a month, you do get access to that Discord server for life. You get access to our Minecraft realm. You get access to any digital uploads that we put onto our server, which we are currently working on different emote packs. We have our Warhammer one, and I'm actually currently working on our Star Wars emote pack coming up as well. So you guys get access to that, and it helps us basically do awesome things like giveaways, game servers, and other high quality content. So thank you guys so much. So we've got a lot going on over there. As I mentioned before, we do also have some supporters on Twitch. You can support us over on Twitch with a subscription or a Prime sub as well, which is free. So if you have Prime, go ahead and send that our way. We would super appreciate it. And it doesn't cost you anything because you're already paying for Prime already. So if you purchase something on our Etsy shop, that also supports the podcast as well. So lots of ways to support us here, guys. We actually have a new product that will hopefully be getting here in the beginning of May, and it is the scientific method sticker. So we're very excited about this one, and those are going to be of limited quantity, not quality. They're high quality stickers, And we're very, very excited about that. So if that first launch goes well, we will make more of those. And I have a lot of different batches and proofs already made up of other products as well. So we're very excited to launch that. So make sure to go ahead and check out our Etsy shop as well. There's a good chance we're going to be putting some of those items on sale soon. So make sure you guys check that out.
All right, guys, you saw the thumbnail, you saw the title, you clicked on this video. Here is the deal with Star Wars: The Acolyte. That's our topic for today. We've been saying for a long time that Star Wars needs to branch off away from the main story arc. No more Skywalkers, no more Palpatines, and start investing into other characters, other stories, and other eras. That's why we see shows like Andor do so well, where they're slightly familiar characters. And I mean, Andor is just a great,
So good.
it's just an amazingly written show. Like, our mom watched it. She's not a Star Wars. She's an adamant not Star Wars fan. But that's why we see like those shows do super well. Same thing with Mando. Everyone loves Mando because it's a brand new character and we love to see it. So that's the kind of thing that the Acolyte is seeking to accomplish. We are resetting the cast and characters, and therefore we're resetting the expectations that come with a Star Wars film or TV show. The downside is no one knows what the heck is going on unless you read all the books, which we understand that is an incredibly small subset of the Star Wars fan base. Even between the two of us, I've read pretty much all of the Star Wars High Republic books. You've read...
I've read several of them, not all of them, but several.
Okay. Yeah. There's one coming out in June, which I think I have a hold for on my library. So I'm a little bit behind. I don't buy them because I'm like, well, if I don't like it, it's that feels bad thing. It's the same reason why I don't buy every single video game I'm interested in, because you get burned one too many times with a bad pre-release or pre-order, and you're like,
So one mistake that I said in the title here, guys, is I said today's episode was going to be about the High Republic. And I didn't say it was going to be about the Acolyte. So if you're like, hey, how are those two related? They're extremely related because the Acolyte is taking place within the era that is known as the High Republic. So I do apologize about not clarifying that in the title. So what we're going to be going over today is several different main points to kind of get you guys all caught up. We love lore here, so that's essentially what we're going to be talking about here. Today is lore and history.
it's a big lore episode.
So we're going to be talking about overall, I'll just give you guys a quick summary and then we'll go through those point by point, is things you should know for the Acolyte, who you might recognize, what do you need to know, general setting, events leading up to this, and then characters new to this era and show. So we're going over a lot. We also, if we have time, we're probably going to talk about some planets, some factions, and a little bit of timeline stuff as well. There's a lot. I have a lot of timeline notes in this. So
Sweet.
this is going to be a good time. So we are starting all the way. I got to scroll way back up to the top with things you should know for the Acolyte if you have seen the trailer, kind of getting where this show is going to be set and when we should expect it.
So a couple things let's start with. So the Acolyte itself is taking place 100 years before the Phantom Menace, give or take. The actual High Republic era starts around 200 years before. So this is about halfway through. The premise of the show is the Jedi are investigating crimes. A lot, we don't see this as much in the movies, but a lot of the books and video games for Star Wars, especially when you're playing a Jedi, is you're actually investigating crimes. You're a criminal investigator. You're a wizard cop, essentially. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And that's what we kind of see here. We kind of see the Jedi trying to investigate, hey, what exactly is going on here? And boy, howdy, we have no idea what's actually going on. So there's going to be, it's going to be a lot of speculation. The first two episodes are debuting on June 4th. So by the time this releases, it's going to be like 5 weeks approximately until we see the Acolyte. So it's a little bit of time to process this information and kind of be like, okay, I'm set up for the High Republic and where my expectations need to be. Logistically, the High Republic, I keep saying that, it's been a series of movies, books, and comics released between 2021 and currently set to conclude in 2025. It's technically the second TV show. So the first TV show in the High Republic is the Young Jedi Adventures.
Absolutely. It's going to be very interesting. See, that was going to be my question. I was like, you had movies in the list, and I was like, what TV have we gotten that this takes place on? And I was like, oh, okay. I see now.
Yeah, it's technically the Young Jedi Adventures. I haven't watched it because it's a kid's show. If it's not Bluey, I'm not interested.
Unless they give Bluey a lightsaber.
Oh my, I would freak out. I don't actually watch Bluey, but I see like tons of clips of people reacting to Bluey and about like, oh, like the mother had like the same postpartum depression experience as I did, and they're just like weeping while watching a kids cartoon, and I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, it's good writing. Star Wars. Uh the High Republic, so this isn't going to be like, oh, this is the only era they're going to focus on forever and ever, amen. It's currently set to conclude in 2025, so we have about a year and a half left.
I do like that they set a conclusion date for this and they weren't just going to run it and run it and run it forever. They're like, hey, these are the years we're going to produce. This is the content. The timeline itself does bounce around quite as well, which is kind of interesting. And you guys may already notice if you caught that before. So the Acolyte is going to happen 100 years before the Phantom Menace. So the High Republic era starts around 200 years before. Andrew had mentioned that. So the High Republic actually reaches its zenith between 500 and 200. It's this overarching period in the Republic as we know it, or the modern Republic, that they kind of quest up and up and up, and the 200-year mark is kind of arbitrarily like where they're in the High Republic 500 years before, but the 200-year mark is like this is them at the height of their power, the Republic, the Jedi, things like that. So that's kind of where we are at in the setting. And if you know much about the Star Wars universe, you know that some of the characters in the Star Wars universe are very, very old. So characters that we've seen on screen quite a bit, like Yaddle, Yarael Poof, and Yoda. So, Andrew, go ahead and hit us with some facts about these characters.
So all of these Y named characters.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. They totally are all Y names.
Y names are for old people. I anticipate these are the only three characters that people will recognize. Maybe Yarael Poof, like he really is only shown in episode 1 for like 5 minutes tops, and he actually dies before the start of the Clone Wars, so I don't believe he's in episode 2. For those episode 2 fanatics, if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. Well, maybe I just need to rewatch it now. So Yaddle, we see who actually perishes kind of at the beginning of the Clone Wars, and we see that her fate is ultimately sealed by Dooku when he falls to the dark side in Tales of the Jedi. So Yaddle, she's voiced by Bryce Dallas Howard, bless her heart. It'd be really cool for us to see Bryce Dallas Howard reprise her role as Yaddle. Moving on to... man, I read the wiki entry for this guy, and I'm just like, he's a weirdo. So Yarael Poof, he's a Cormian,
not a Kaminoan,
even though he kind of looks like a Kaminoan. I had never heard the word Cormian before reading that wiki entry, which is probably good. Unpopular opinion, I think George Lucas is off his rocker with some of this stuff. He's a weird dude. And I think that's why episode 1, 2, and 3 have some super odd choices of characters, like Jar Jar Binks. Evidence A.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some weird characters here. So
let me just say, after looking at a picture of Yarael Poof's face while doing research for this episode, his expression haunts me. It actually freaks me out a little bit. He looks like something out of like an SCP or like a horror movie. And that like the longer you look at his face, you expect it to kind of just like rush the camera. It's like, I cannot emphasize enough how little I enjoy looking at his face in his creepy eyes, his creepy reddish orange eyes. Hate it.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great.
I don't like it. And then the last person we see is still Yoda. So it should be noted that in the High Republic period, Yoda is still a Jedi Grand Master. In the High Republic, the Jedi actually do have multiple Grand Masters. That was kind of something that was a little unclear about how like the Jedi hierarchy works, because in the prequels, it was alluded to that there's only one Grand Master. Like that's like a top dog title. In the High Republic, there was actually multiple, which is kind of sad because in one of the books, I'm pretty sure they die. Super sad. But I'm actually not going to read my notes.
Yeah, maybe good because we don't want to censor too many parts of this. But y'all know what Yoda looks like, so if we see him again, basically, yeah, it's a good note anyway. But we won't say that because again, I don't want to have to add and censor all of that out. So those are the characters that you guys should be expecting to see. Now, moving on to our next section here, guys. What do you need to know? So this is basically for the fans of the books. How many familiar sights and factions should we expect? So the Jedi basically come in a slightly, like in the High Republic, the Jedi come in a slightly different flavor than we usually expect. The High Republic, the traditions within the order are much looser, less dogmatic is really one of the big things. The reason we don't refer to the Republic as it's known in the prequels as the High Republic is because they've transitioned into a more, I should say the Jedi have transitioned into more of a dogmatic religious order than they are found in the High Republic, and the Republic has lost some of its glory, essentially, by this point. So keep in mind that's kind of the changes that you might be seeing. So the order is a little bit looser with its regulations. However, we know that all of that changes in time by the time we get to the Phantom Menace.
And one thing we're going to talk about a lot is expression and interpretation of the Force by the Jedi in the High Republic is much more diverse than it is in the prequels. In the prequels, it's like, this is the Force, this is how you interpret it. Whereas in the High Republic, it's very clear that different characters experience the Force in different ways. Avar Kriss actually experienced the Force as music. There's a couple other Jedis that view it as like an ocean. Some others feel it as like arrays of colors and things like this and kind of their mind's eye. So the way they interpret the Force is totally different between Jedi and Jedi. That's why we see, and because of that, we see a lot of physical differences between Jedi. It's not everyone is wearing the same tan robes. Their robes are a little bit more ostentatious. They're a little bit more glam, because the Jedi don't see that as a problem. And as we move on, as the Jedi Order becomes more aesthetic, not aesthetic,
less aesthetic, basically,
leans more into asceticism. So like the denying of self, we see that their physical expression and outward expression of their personalities, their wants, their desires, and ultimately their expression and interpretation of the Force becomes very, like what you said, dogmatic and same. Everyone's the same. It basically just cranks out copies of Jedi. And when people like Qui-Gon Jinn come into the mix who do not have the same interpretation of the Force, they're very much like outcast, and they're not given the same privileges. They're looked down upon. Same thing happened with Dooku. I mean, honest to goodness, I think Qui-Gon Jinn probably would have followed Dooku if he hadn't have been killed, because the Jedi Order is so restrictive that it just crushes people's individual interpretation of the Force, which I think is wrong. And ultimately, I think that's something that led to the destruction of the Jedi.
Indeed. So it's this very dogmatic way of thinking and stray from the old traditions of the High Republic that actually makes Qui-Gon such a contentious ally in Star Wars lore. So you don't really get to see this in The Phantom Menace other than like very slight conversations with Yoda and a little bit of bickering, but really not that much. But like Qui-Gon, especially back in like in Legends, especially
Qui-Gon.
he got in a lot of fights with the Council. Like this guy was
Tons.
constantly arguing with everybody because he interpreted everything differently. And honestly, we get to see how that pays out for him. Not because he died, but he was one of the first Jedi to achieve immortality through the Force because he was willing to explore these expressions of the Force. And he was basically the one that reached out to Yoda. Yoda learned this power and then he started passing it along. And because he did this, he's like, hey, I figured out how to do this. And you guys just need to see this a little bit differently. And it gets passed on to these future Force wielders. So that's kind of where this all started. And who knows, like we know the Sith are very adept at making Force ghosts. There's a whole planet basically infested with them. Korriban. Yavin 4 has a decent Force Ghost problem as well in canon.
Yeah, there's in canon or in Legends.
Or sorry, in Legends, excuse me.
Yeah, because I know Exar Kun has like an entire Jedi temple there. Which, side note, I am currently in my little mind palace. I am currently writing an episode about why Luke Skywalker is not a good Jedi master.
I can't wait to see those notes. I'm so excited.
It's going to be brutal.
Super excited. I'm excited to moderate that discussion. I'm basically just going to be like, all right, folks, and Andrew here has got some thoughts and he's going to share it with the class. So that's going to be very, very good. Here is my PowerPoint presentation on why Luke Skywalker wasn't a good Jedi. Anyways, we're going to hop into the general setting of the High Republic here, guys. So keep in mind that overall, the High Republic is not necessarily written for older readers, which does include Andrew and I. The entire series has dozens and dozens and dozens of titles across adult literature, young adult, young readers, comic books like crazy. There's so many pieces of media in the High Republic. They pulled a Disney and basically were trying to make hit as many age demographics as possible. Now, keep in mind, there are only, even though there's dozens and dozens of titles out there, there are only 8 titles that are actually specifically written towards the adult audience. So, and no, there isn't any smut. I checked. So we're not talking like adult, like it's like, just like, yeah, it's for Star Wars fans who are, in their 30s and above.
They're not YA novels. And I should add, these novels are the most important novels for advancing the mainline story of the High Republic.
Yes.
I have read a lot of the YA stuff, the young adult novels, and they're usually offshoots. They feel like side quests. And because they are written to a younger audience, they're not able to kind of show the brutality that the High Republic Jedi encounter in the mainline novels, because things do go very, very poorly for the Jedi in this time.
Yes. So these are overall, out of the 8 adult titles, only 6 have been released so far. We have Phase 1, 2, and 3. So Phase 1 is made up of Light of the Jedi, The Rising Storm, and The Fallen Star. These all happen between 232 and 230 BBY. So keep in mind, these are
a 2-year time frame.
Yeah, so a 2-year time frame. These are right smack in the middle of the time frame that we are looking at, specifically in the High Republic. So these are going to be the closest, other than Phase 3, with what's happening in the Acolyte. Fun fact, I didn't know this until I started reading them because I was very, very confused. Phase 2 is a prequel to Phase 1, which, like, Star Wars needs to get their stuff together. Like, Phase 2 should have been Phase 1, and then should have went 1 to 2, and then 3 could have just stayed 3. Like,
well, they pulled a prequel. They're like, let's make movies 4, 5, and 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9. That's essentially what they did with the High Republic books, and it was so confusing. It was so obnoxious. I was like, what is happening? And it was only because I had read the Phase 1 books sometimes 1 or 2 or even 3 times, because some of them are really good. Light of the Jedi is really good, and I read it quite a few times.
Yeah.
So I was extremely familiar with what was going on, and I realized, I was like, wait, this person is still, I was like, this person's a Padawan? Wait, what's going on? Or like, I think Yoda was like my biggest clue, because when they would talked about Yoda, I think in phase 2 they refer to him as like maybe just a master. That might be a guess, but it was like he's a grandmaster in one of the books I just read. So it's those kind of things that really keyed me in. um, I use them as kind of my reference point, both Yoda and Yaddle, and a little bit of Yariel Poof, but I really don't like talking about him. He's such a freak.
Yeah, just so you guys know, phase 2 happens 150 years before phase 1. And then
Yes.
phase 1 and 3 are basically continuous, because it goes
Yeah.
32, 31, 30, 29. Like they're all, it's 4 years of time in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. And I should clarify, so the way Star Wars stuff is like monitored on the timeline, it's like in our time we have the birth of Christ as like, okay, this is our 0 point, everything before that is BC, everything after that is AD. Well, Star Wars is the same thing, but instead of with like the birth of their Messiah, it's actually the destruction of the Death Star. So it's before the Battle of Yavin and after the Battle of Yavin. So that's why.
Yeah, BBY and ABY.
Yeah, so the numbers go from big to small and then small to big.
Indeed. So lots of stuff going on in there. We're not going to talk about each one of these titles individually because that would take too long, but eventually we will. Eventually we will go through these in detail and be like, hey, this is what happens in this book, and we can even do summary episodes. However, I will say one of the Jedi that we are confirmed in seeing, who is Vernestra Rowe, who shows up in these titles, who you would not have seen in much other Star Wars media,
Correct.
does show up a lot in these books and also the young adult series as well. So I would say between all of the titles that come out, I would say probably the most important are the adult fiction. And then the young adult, I would say, is like a second place because it does cover this character in a little bit more detail and actually talks about her struggle with like the weapon she uses, things like that. But we'll actually go into that here in a little bit more detail here in just a little bit. So if you have the time, I would recommend reading the young adult series as well. But a lot of that is, it can be left up to interpretation of whether or not you want to read through that. So coming up next, we're going to go over kind of what big events do you guys need to know what have happened in the recent history of the High Republic. And there's quite a few. So what we're going to talk about really quick is the Great Hyperspace Disaster, Starlight Beacon, and the Nihil conflict. So those are going to be kind of the big ones that we move into.
We're going to start off with the Great Disaster, or the destruction of the Legacy Run. Your notes on this are perfect. It's a big space shotgun. So if you all recall from The Last Jedi, is that when you take an object really close to hyperspeed and then ram it into something else, it's a kinetic kill vehicle, and it destroys everything in its path. Interestingly enough, a lot of people like really didn't like The Last Jedi, like that scene. They're like, oh, that wouldn't work that way, which no, it probably wouldn't have. There's some issues with how you interpret how hyperspace works, but that's not for this episode. However, in the book I, Jedi, which is a Legends novel, they do talk about running things up close to the speed of light before they get into hyperspace and using them as weapons. So there is actually a Star Wars precedent for The Last Jedi and now the Great Disaster. Basically what happens is the Legacy Run, which is already in hyperspace, explodes. It explodes, and the different shards of the ship, it's a big ship, it's a passenger slash storage ship or container ship basically, and when it fails, and we find out that it fails because the Nihil wanted it to fail. They're space pirates. We're going to talk more about them later. These separate parts basically dispersed along the initial trajectory, and quite a few of these pieces impacted planets. Not all of them did. Some were actually able to be intercepted by the Jedi. A lot of Jedi perished in attempting to stop them. There's a couple instances like I said, where some of these pieces actually do impact planets, and the entire population of those planets are decimated. I mean, it's extinction events.
Yeah, everyone who didn't get off the planet died,
Yes.
basically. As you would expect.
Yes. And thankfully, because space is incredibly large, that even things that are traveling close to the speed of light, they basically were able to detect them and be like, oh crap, you have a couple hours or you have a couple days until this planet is going to be destroyed. And it's an absolute disastrous event. It's one of the largest loss of life events that we don't even see until the Clone Wars and the Death Star. This event might actually have killed more people than the Death Star, but definitely not more people than Starkiller Base.
Indeed. One cool thing to note about the Great Disaster here, guys, is as that legacy run was basically being splintered in hyperspace, not everything emerged at the same time. So what had happened was they basically, on the first planet that it was going to impact on, this like relay station at the edge of the system basically like detects something coming out of hyperspace, and they're like, oh, that's weird. And then they died. They had almost no chance to relay that information. I believe they were able to, and basically say, hey, everybody has like, it was like less than like 3 or 4 hours or some super short time frame. Because again, things moving at a fraction of the speed of light are going very, very quickly as it's out of hyperspace now. And I don't know if it's technically decelerating. I don't think that's important, but it's going very, very quickly.
In space, deceleration would be negligible because there's no actual like atmosphere molecules to slow it down.
Exactly. So they basically have this warning. The planet is like, hey, everyone needs to get off, but they don't have, there's no planet that has the infrastructure to evacuate its entire population in an hour's notice. Like it doesn't work. Thankfully there was Jedi nearby. They're able to locate this. They somewhat succeeded in stopping some of the projectiles, but not all of them. One of the big things to note about this is that this was just one instance. So as this, like several containers, which interestingly enough, the containers were actually full of people and
who were alive,
which is becomes a complication later in the story, but we'll let you guys get there. And some of these pieces are still in hyperspace. And so they were like, hey, this like awful thing happened. And now the Republic is trying to find the rest of these pieces. They are flying across the galaxy, basically trying to map out a trajectory over the next several books to try to find the rest of these pieces and basically stop them from impacting other objects. It's kind of wild.
So reading this book, I was listening to it on audiobook because that's the main way I can get through the amount of books that I want to get through. I was driving and I missed my exit because I was listening to the book and I was like, oh shoot, I was supposed to turn there. So I just had to go to the next exit and take the back roads back because I was so engrossed in what was happening. I was like, this is awful. Continues to eat popcorn.
Oh no, munch. Absolutely. Big space shotgun. So,
big space shotgun.
Then we come up to Starlight Beacon. This is another kind of pivotal moment for the High Republic. So not only did the Great Hyperspace Disaster basically put the entire Republic on edge, and they were like, what the heck just happened? It kind of introduced a new foe, the Nihil, but they were like, they knew of them before, but they were just kind of a pirate organization. So it wasn't really like the High Republic wasn't at war with this faction, essentially. Just so you guys know, the title The Fallen Star is kind of a spoiler to what happens to this space station. So I was kind of mad about that when I read it. I was like, seriously? You guys are going to give this away in the title? Anyways, that is another pivotal moment of what happens to the Starlight Beacon.
They totally spoil it.
Yeah, they totally spoil it. Because basically the beacon gets destroyed. It's wild. The Nihil essentially make their presence known. And they're like, hey, your cool beacon that is supposed to be a symbol of hope and connection and expansion for the New Republic kind of into the Outer Rim. Because the High Republic is actually still sending Jedi to the Outer Rim to kind of collect everybody back at this point. This has been happening for several hundred years.
Yeah.
And they were like, hey, we should probably have something near the outer rim that people can go to, they can resupply, they can do all of these things and like basically have a waypoint so that they don't have to go all the way back to the galactic core every time they need
Yeah.
to resupply. So kind of a
Yeah.
wild time, and the Nihil messed it up.
Yeah, in this era, new hyperspace routes are still being created. There's a lot of like hyperspace prospectors that are a thing that they're like going out and they're trying to map safe ways to travel the galaxy. Um, the galaxy is a little bit more of a dangerous place, almost very similar to uh, what is referred to as the chaos in the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, where this is outside the known galaxy. The Chiss Empire resides in such a chaotic area of space with black holes and things to run into that basically without these navigators who are force sensitive children of the Chiss, they can't navigate the stars without them. Otherwise, they have to do small jump by jump navigations to different worlds, and which is much, much slower. And that's essentially
Much slower and more dangerous. There's more chance for error.
and more dangerous. And that's essentially where the Republic is at before, these long hyperspace routes were established. Is they're like, okay, well, we have to make a small jump. Oh, well, now we have to make another small jump. Because as we see in hyperspace, you're not really aware of what is going on around you, because hyperspace is, my interpretation of hyperspace is it's like a parallel dimension to the real world. And as like and as things with large gravitational pulls bend space-time, it actually overlaps into the hyperspace dimension and will pull you out or pull you in. So that's kind of my theory. We see that like as things approach the speed of light, their mass gets denser. So that's actually my theory of how things enter hyperspace. Is they approach the speed of light, their mass becomes so dense that they actually puncture through into the hyperspace dimension and are able to travel it. And that's also how we see interdictor cruisers. Basically, they create these gravitational, like artificial gravitational fields, and are able to pull things out because they create what's called a mass shadow. Basically, it bends the real space in such a way that it intersects with the hyperspace dimension, and that when ships get too close to it, they're ripped back into normal space. That's my interpretation of what's going on in hyperspace.
Applying physics to a universe with space wizards is sometimes very hard. So I applaud you. I applaud you, brother.
I think it's a pretty great theory, honestly.
That's just a theory.
A space theory.
Indeed. So that's kind of what's going on with Starlight Beacon. And overall, between all of these different events, I should note, actually, before I go into our next bullet point, is something that's really important to know is that because there's all of these hyperspace lanes, quote unquote, and that the legacy run got destroyed in hyperspace, because not every piece is accounted for. And as you mentioned, because jumping to system is safer, but it's so much slower, the Republic's economy and travel infrastructure comes to a grinding halt because they're like, hey, we can't use these hyper lanes anymore.
The economy.
Yeah, the economy. Oh, my money's. Anyways, they can't travel on the highways because there's bullets racing through the highways. They're like, hey, you could take this hyperspace route. You might get shot, though. Most pilots are like, hey, we're not going to do that. Now we're going to take back roads. So it's essentially like now we have to take back roads from planet to planet, all the way from the core to the middle rim to the outer rim, and everything just gets shut down. So this is another big economic pressure that the High Republic is under at this time as well.
It's very similar to air travel post 9/11, like right after 9/11. So the Great Disaster very much is a, planes have crashed into the World Trade Center moment. But even in that heightened state of awareness and like, is something else going to happen again? That's when we see Starlight Beacon come under attack, and you're like, oh my gosh, it is happening again. So it's it's bad. It's real bad. It's really the vibe it kind of gives is. Hopefully, some of our viewers are too young to remember that, but it was awful.
Overarching throughout all of this, moving on to our next point, excuse me.
Thank you.
So, overarching across all of this is the Nihil conflict. So, essentially, the Nihil caused the destruction of the legend of the Legacy run. And this is sort of an accident, but sort of not. It was a misuse of the Nihil's hyperspace capabilities. So, Nihil is the only current faction that does not require these hyperspace lanes to travel from system to system. These hyperspace lanes have essentially already been carved out by what are essentially space prospectors and pathfinders, that they're like, hey, these routes work, they're safe to travel, minus, space shotguns happening. They're safe to travel, and they go from this planet all the way to this system. Like they're very well mapped, essentially. However, they're not straight lines most of the time. The Nihil, however, from my understanding, is they basically have these hyperspace wizards, or wizard singular, of essentially a force sensitive captive that's held by their leader. It's a whole nother ball of drugs that is also very much, it's strange. We'll try to unpack this as much as we can.
It's super weird.
But because they have this force sensitive hyperspace person in their captivity, they can now map shorter and more effective ways to jump through hyperspace, which makes them very effective pirates because they don't have to follow all the lanes. Even with the hyperspace disaster and all the lanes shut down, they're like, we don't need those. We can basically hop from point to point as these new paths, as they call them, become aware or become known to them. And their leader currently is Marchion Ro, or some people pronounce it Marchion. If you listen to the books, I'm pretty sure it's Marchion Ro as the main villain behind the Nihil. And he's got some interesting things up his sleeve. But honestly, the Nihil are probably one of the most dangerous foes the Republic and specifically the Jedi have faced in their entire existence.
And let me be clear, the Nihil are not associated with the Sith. They're their own thing.
Yeah, they're not.
They just also happen to hate the Jedi.
Yes. They hate the Jedi, they hate the Republic, but like that makes sense. They're a criminal organization, and the Republic's like, hey, stop being a criminal organization. And they're like, no, it's getting us super rich. So that's essentially where they're at.
Well, and not only are the Jedi essentially used as the executive arm of the Republic, even though they're technically not. They're technically not employed by the Republic, but they sort of are. It's a very strange relationship. Not only that, but Marchion Ro comes from a line of people where it's explained in phase 2. Here's just like a really, really quick synopsis. Is basically his family comes from a Force cult that believes that anyone who touches the Force is an abomination. They believe the Force shouldn't be played with at all, that it should be completely left alone to its own devices. But they also worship it. They're like, if you touch this thing, you're basically defiling our God, essentially.
That's the cult of the hand.
It starts as the Path of the Open Hand.
Path of the Open Hand. Thank you.
And then it changes to like, I want to say the Path of the Closed Fist. That's when they become actually a militant terrorist organization. And that's where we see books like the Battle of Jeddah take place, which there's this like convocation of different Force religions, the Jedi being one of those. They all come together, and basically the Path of the Closed Fist blows the whole thing up. They're just like, we're going to do a terrorism and we're going to start killing people. And they actually sick these animals on the crowd, and these animals, which are referred to as the Nameless, hunt Force users.
Nice.
And in a very terrifying way, they basically disable their prey by filling their mind with fear. So even like some of the strongest Jedi are not able to overcome this, and they're just like overcome with visions of fear, and they're just like totally immobilized. And then these nameless creatures basically suck the life out of them. They'd like turn them to stone, and they just like dissolve into ash. And it's like a horrible, horrible way to die, because they're just like screaming bloody murder, and then they just like freeze up, almost like kind of the way the White Witch would freeze things with her little from Narnia, with her little scepter. She would freeze things to stone, but then they would just like crumble into ash, and they are dead. Dead.
This is the same creature that we see later in phase 1 and 3, correct? Used against some of the Jedi. Yeah.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Marchion Ro, because he's associated through his genetic line to the path of the closed fist, he founds the Nihil, and then he is able that they lose the ability to like tame these creatures. Tame is sort of a not a great word, but they actually find another source of these creatures, and he starts sicking them on the Jedi Order as we see them. So that's actually something we might see in the Acolyte show, is these nameless creatures. I will be interested to see how that is represented, because it would be hard to show those on film without going like full horror mode, because they're so terrifying in the books. Yeah, honestly, I hope they do it.
To be fair, Disney has played with that a little bit with that interrogation scene from Andor. So
yeah, it's definitely that kind of like mind freak thing.
All right, moving on here, guys. Just keep in mind that the only phase that we're going to kind of ignore as we're kind of setting everything up for the Acolyte is phase 2, because this is basically I've got a few bullet points here that are going to sum everything up that you guys need to know. So overall, the Jedi are still in a time of exploration. This is 350 years before the Phantom Menace. They continue to send out Jedi to the Outer Rim to reunite the galaxy. The Jedi are also using this as a time of enlightenment, searching for new pieces of the Force to learn about and study. And basically, stuff starts to hit the fan. Some Force-sensitive cults pop up, or also cults that are not so Force-sensitive and very Force-negative. And these eventually plant the roots of the Nihil. This is the path of the open hand and the path of the closed fist. So that's essentially what happens. And these books go into sort of the creation of these and characters that you might know. So, all right, coming up next here, guys, we're going to talk about characters that are new to this era and to this show. We've got a few that we're going to go through here, and we're basically just going to keep this nice and light in who they're played by. So, Andrew, go ahead and lead us through, please. The green one.
Yes, she's the green one. I want to say she's a Mary Allen, same species as Barriss Offee.
Maybe. Yeah,
I think.
I don't know.
I didn't fact check that. That's just a guess. So her last name, Ro, sounds the same as Marchion Ro, but it's not. It's spelled different, sounds the same. Confusing? Definitely. But she is going to be played by Rebecca Henderson, who's also known for her role in Russian Doll and Mending Anna and Werewolves Within, along with quite a few other shows. She's the green one. She sports a very fashionable purple lightsaber that turns into a light whip. This will be the first time we ever see a light whip on camera. So I'm super excited. I'm really excited. There's very, very few people in canon who wield the lightsaber whip. She might actually be the only one. Everyone else is in Legends.
Correct.
Moving on, Jedi Master Soul. This is the guy who is like teaching the younglings in that scene in the Coruscant High Temple. This is played by Lee Jung-jae from Squid Game, the main character from Squid Game. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, super excited for that.
A twin moment. And then we also have a character called Mother Anicia.
Anicia? I'm not entirely sure. You had this previously. I updated this. You had this previously labeled as an unknown character, and I double checked it. Went to the an updated page, and this is essentially who Jodie Turner Smith is playing.
Okay. Yeah, she's got big Benny Gesserit and energy on this one. She's like kind of surrounded by people in similar clothing, and with the amount of Force cults that have been in the show, I would not be super surprised if she is, you know, the remnant of the Path of the Open Hand or the Path of the Closed Fist, even. Because the Path of the Open Hand is very much like, we hate the Jedi, but we're going to do a lot of like good for the communities that we're in and try to sway people that way. And the Path of the Closed Fist is we hate the Jedi and we're going to kill them.
Pretty much. That's about how things go.
It will be really interesting to see. It'll be really interesting to see what's her deal, because she looks very menacing. So I'm really excited about this. Another character we see, her name is just May. So this is the kind of the ninja looking character who she's trying to stab the other Jedi. She's going to be played by Amanda Stenberg. We know nothing about her. We don't even know if she is actually the Acolyte. She's not shown wielding the lightsaber. When that red lightsaber goes cutting through the forest, we don't actually see May as the one who threw it. So that might be like a diversion. That might be, what is it called? A red herring, where they're like, they dangle something in front of you, but like, look, this is what you want. And it's like, we tricked you. Yeah, we don't know. As a side note, the Acolyte, whoever that is, we don't know if that is May or not. The Acolyte, which we're pretty sure is a dark side character, we actually don't even know if that's a Sith. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit, but I want to get through the rest of the cast as well.
Mm-hmm.
Another character, Jecki Lawn, is going to be played by Daphne Keene. She is the alien Jedi with the white skin, and she's got like little horn protrusions on her. She doesn't have a ton of screen time in the trailer, but she's also listed in the cast, so hopefully we could see a lot of her. We see a Wookiee Jedi called Kelnaka. This is played by Junis Suotamo. This is the same guy who actually plays Chewbacca in what's it called? Solo, a Star Wars story.
Nice.
I really thought this was going to be Burryaga.
I did as well.
So in the books, there is another Wookiee Jedi. He's an empath. He feels all of the other feelings of people around him, which makes him incredibly powerful, but also like there's been times where that's been like really overwhelming, especially during the hyperspace disaster. Like he felt very acutely all those deaths, and it like almost drove him crazy. But anyway, this is a different Jedi named Kelnaka. I don't know if Burryaga is alive. If he's dead, I will be burning something to the ground. We'll see. There's another character called Indara, which I actually thought this was Indira Stokes, which is a different character, not on the cast list, but it's just single name Indara. This is played by Carrie-Anne Moss. She's the Jedi. I think she's the Jedi who May is trying to kill in that weird dumpy bar.
Gotcha.
Another character called Torben, played by Dean Charles Chapman. Man, these names are so dorky. Another character whose name is Yord Fandar. This is the Jedi with the Killmonger haircut. He's played by Charlie Barnett. And then I don't know who this last person is. It's either Kimir or Quimir.
Probably Kimir.
This is played by Manny Jacinto. So that's the main cast. I wanted to touch on this a little bit. I mentioned that the Acolyte, i.e. the dark side character, might not actually be a Sith. So at this point, we are still neck deep in what's called the rule of two, which is that there's always one master and one apprentice. Of course, there's always the conniving of where usually the apprentice takes his own apprentice, tries to overthrow the master with the help of their apprentice, and then they take their line, which is actually antithetical to the rule of two we could probably do a whole episode on that. I won't. um,
There you go.
so as what we know in the Rule of Two is created by Darth Bane approximately 1,000 years before the Phantom Menace. I know we're throwing a lot of dates. You guys are doing so good at keeping along, but it's basically the Sith Empire is completely eradicated by Bane. It's not canon, so I'm not even going to talk about it. That's Legends. It's a great story. The Path of Destruction, great book. Please read it. It's so good. But then basically between Bane and his apprentice Darth Zana, there is like 800 to 900 years between the next Jedi we learn about, who is Lord Tenebris, which is not a canon character. That's another Legends character. So that's speculative that he even exists. But the next person we hear about who was Tenebris's apprentice is Plagueis. You might have, that name should ring a bell. It's have you heard the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise? That is Darth Plagueis. And then Plagueis is actually Sidious's master. When he's like, yes, his apprentice killed him. It's like, yeah, Sidious is like, yeah, I killed him. 100% I killed him. Which that event is talked about in the book called Plagueis, which is not canon. It's Legends, but it basically is canon. This is so confusing. And I don't blame you guys if you're like, what the heck is he talking about? I'm sorry. I'm really trying to do my best to simplify it. But we basically know nothing. That's the short of it. We know nothing that happens of the Sith in this 1,000-year period. We don't know how many Sith Lords are created. We don't know how many apprentices they took. We don't even know what they were up to. But what I do want to say is that when this dark side user kind of becomes, I wouldn't say public, but like we see them on camera, they're going to be part of the story. This would not be the first time the Sith have risked exposure before their plan comes to fruition through Papa Palpatine. Remember, in the movies, the Jedi are totally blindsided by the return of the Sith. They're like, how could this have happened? I thought the Sith had been extinct for thousands of years. So what we do know from that is that anytime the Sith actually expose themselves, there are no witnesses. They cover their tracks. That's going to be a really important thing for us to keep in mind. Even Bane, the one who started the Rule of Two and sent the Sith into hiding, was actually discovered by a small group of Jedi, and through his superior use of the Force, bladesmanship, and cruelty, he killed every last witness to his existence and thus kept the Sith Order a secret. So that's like a big thing. Anytime we see a Sith on screen, expect lots of Jedi to die and lots of witnesses to be silenced.
Indeed. Coming up next here, guys, what we're going to chat about is just kind of the overall factions to wrap this up and kind of, again, just go over one last timeline before we finish out this episode. So the factions that you guys should know about are the Jedi and the Republic, which are technically different, but the Jedi and the Republic were actually both formed at about the same time, which was about 25,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. So 25 millennia before. The Old Republic, which was just a republic at the time, but it's now referred to as the Old Republic, and the Jedi were formed. And this was all basically, this happened on Coruscant. So good to know there. Then the Old Republic goes all the way to about 1032 BBY. At that point, the Republic is it goes through a little bit of a Reformation phase, and it becomes the Grand Republic, or what we're currently referred to. And then the High Republic is a colloquial term. It's essentially like, it's not like they didn't rebrand themselves as the High Republic, but in history, that's what we refer to them to.
It's like the Roaring 20s.
Exactly. They didn't call the Roaring 20s while they were in the 20s, I think. So,
which is interesting because the High Republic definitely has an Art Deco aesthetic.
Yes, indeed. So that was mostly refers to the Republic at the height of its power, from 500 BBY all the way to about 100 BBY, which again is where we mentioned earlier things start to dip off. And then, of course, the Republic officially dissolves in 19 BBY with the birth of the Galactic Empire. Then we've got the Nihil.
The First Galactic Empire.
Indeed. Then we've got the Nihil, which are just basically space pirates on drugs with hyperspace wizards. And then the Sith technically exist, but they're MIA at this moment. We don't know if the Acolyte is a Sith. We don't know if the Sith are going to take part in this. And that's the entire point of the Sith, is you don't know where they're at or where they're going to be, or even if they're going to show up or if they're pulling the strings. That is exactly where we want them. They're very mysterious. So, Andrew, do you have any final notes you want to add in before we finish this out?
I mostly just want to thank people for making it this far. I know the High Republic is super weird. We're actually planning on doing another episode on the High Republic to kind of fill in some of the gaps of what's going on and kind of prepare people for the Acolyte as best we can.
All right, guys, thank you so much for everyone watching. Every single one of you is amazing. Make sure you guys leave us your theories in the comments. That really, really helps not only engagement of the video itself, so it makes our numbers look good, but it also lets us connect with you guys as well. We want to hear what you guys have to think, what you guys have to say, and then we can talk about those things on the podcast. We really like incorporating that viewer feedback into what we have going on. So if you guys have questions, make sure you post them in the comments. You can also be super old school and shoot us an email at talkabouttatooine@gmail.com if you have a question that you want to be featured on air. Make sure to subscribe and like this video so the algorithmic overlords will slice this video into the feeds of other like-minded folks. Please support us on Patreon, buy stuff from our Etsy store, and subscribe on Twitch. Do all those things. Until next time, guys, may the Force be with you.